welcome back to the Wellness Paradox podcast. I'm so grateful that you can join us on this journey towards greater human flourishing. As always, I'm your host, Michael Stack, an exercise physiologist by training and a health entrepreneur and a health educator by trade. And I'm fascinated by a phenomena I call the wellness paradox. This paradox, as I view it, is the trust, interaction, and communication gap that exists between fitness professionals and our medical community. This podcast is all about closing off that gap by disseminating the latest, most evidence-based, and most engaging information in the health sciences. And to do that in episode 87, I'm joined by Tom Johnston. Tom is a longtime fitness industry veteran who's transitioned into a leadership consultant as he's gotten to the latter stages of his career. And Tom and I have connected recently, and we've actually been involved in some work together. And I wanted to bring him on the podcast to talk about leadership. You know, from some of our previous conversations, this is a topic I'm very, very passionate about. And I couldn't be any more excited than to bring Tom's approach and perspective on leadership to all of you as we enter in here to 2023. I think he has so many amazing insights to provide about how we truly can all be compassionate leaders in our organization, regardless if we're a frontline team member or if we are someone that is in a formal leadership role. Any information we'd like to share with you from today's episode can be found on the show notes page by going to wellnessparadoxpod.com/episode 87. Please enjoy this conversation with Tom Johnston. Today, we're delighted to be joined by Tom Johnston. Tom, thank you so much for joining us.
Oh, thanks, Mike. It's a pleasure to be here.
So I'm excited to start 2023 with Tom. The quick story on Tom and I is we spent about 3 hours in a car driving back and forth in the countryside of North Carolina several months back and struck up a great relationship and a great conversation around leadership. And that's what we're going to talk about today. But before we dive into the leadership topic, why don't you just give us a little bit of an idea of your background to provide some context for our conversation?
Yeah, sure. Excuse me. So my background, I like to say I grew up in the fitness industry. So I started my career working part-time as a Nautilus instructor before there was personal trainers. And I'm from New York and grew up in the suburbs of New York. And my first club I worked at was a tennis club that was in the process of being converted to what is now a multi-sport club. And I'll speak to this in the context of leadership as well, Mike, because I've had the opportunity to work with some great mentors over the course of my career. And one of the first people I worked with was a woman by the name of Beth Beck, and she was one of the founders of Club Fit. And I worked my way through college as a Nautilus instructor, then got involved in membership sales. And I say to people, like, that was when I really, maybe really discovered like the power of what it is that we do in this in the fitness industry and how we can change lives. And I won't go into a whole story as to what I saw there, but suffice to say, I realized that we were changing lives. And I realized that, as a college student, and really got interested in the fitness, the business side of things. And that was the trajectory I took, was not necessarily into as a fitness professional trainer, more on the business side. And then from there, I moved into a GM role. My first GM role was with Weymouth Club on the South Shore of Boston. And Steve and Sally Goldman were the owners of that. And it was interesting because they were converting a tennis club into a multi-sport club. And I had just gone through this experience. So I was like basically one step ahead, that I knew a couple of things more than they might know. Yeah. And had a wonderful run with them, and then came back to New York. And was vice president of Sawmill Sports Management, where I oversaw 5 multi-sport clubs, fitness clubs, and worked for the Buseman family, and had the great experience of working with Kurt Buseman and the Buseman family. Great learning experience. And then back in 2008, some different things went on, and we had this little problem with the economy, and I was in the process of acquiring a club that didn't work out. And I landed with an organization called American Leisure. And candidly, I needed a job.
Hmm.
And somebody that we know, our mutual friend of ours, Sal Pellegrino, introduced
Hmm.
me to this guy. His name was Steve Cass, who was the founder of American Leisure, and I stepped in as the COO. American Leisure was a real estate service company, so
Yeah.
we were designing and operating amenity spaces in luxury buildings, in pretty much in New York City. And then lo and behold, in early 2009, we got a call from somebody in Saudi Arabia, and said, "Hey, we're opening up this university in Saudi Arabia, and we'd like for you to come out and help us design the programming for that." And there I was, on a plane to Saudi Arabia in 2009, and had the very, very unique experience of being part of opening of the first co-ed, first international university in Saudi Arabia. And very much what we did was steeped in fitness, but it was also really understanding the lifestyle programming. And from there, I got interested in positive psychology and recognizing that, there was way more to fitness than just physical fitness. It's, how are we doing mentally and emotionally and spiritually to some degree, right? And along the way, I became interested in positive psychology, got a certification in positive psychology, then became an energy, went through a coaching certification, became an energy leadership coach. And all the while, I like to say from a leadership perspective was me really, becoming the best version of myself in learning and growing. And, and then yeah, I had this, so, kind of wrap it up. I then had an opportunity to work for Michael Bruno, who's the owner of Core Health and Fitness. And
Hmm.
so Core Health and Fitness, the brands were Nautilus, Stairmaster, Star Trek, Schwinn, and then Throwdown. And what ended up happening is I kind of went full circle back to Nautilus.
Yeah.
And
Right.
then I started my career like teaching people how to use Nautilus equipment. And there I was as Vice President, North American Distributor, Global Vertical Sales for Core Health and Fitness. COVID hit, furlough, laid off. And then I had the opportunity to step back and say, what is it that I want to do at this point in my career? And I took this side gig of this coaching and consulting business and have now made that, my full-time gig since 2020. And I'm loving what I do every day. And that's really what it's about for me. And, when I think about talk a little bit maybe about my why, my mission is to help people do the work that they love to do every day. So together we increase world happiness. Because if we're doing what we love to do every day, we're typically going to be happier, and the world around us is going to, the people who we come in contact, we're going to be happier. And I can think of no better way to do that than working in the fitness with people in the fitness industry, because we touch so many lives.
Yeah, I love it. I love your career trajectory. It's just this continual, evolution to the point you're at now. One of the common threads throughout all of that I heard is the thread of being in a leadership position and, helping to lead others and to lead change, all of which are, complicated and challenging things. Particularly, you talked about, through the, 2008 financial crisis, you were coming out of COVID. So the topic of leadership is something I'm very passionate about. And, you and I have obviously, with our relationship, have had many conversations about leadership. And that's what I want to dive into in this conversation, because right now, at least as best as I understand it from our relationship, your role is as a leadership consultant almost to the fitness industry, to a great extent. So I'm curious how you, just broadly speaking, like to think about leadership generally, and then also within the context of our industry.
Well, leadership in general is the recognition first and foremost that we're all leaders.
Yeah.
Whether I'm the CEO of a company that's got 20, 30,000 employees, or whether I'm an individual contributor in an organization, we're all leaders.
Mm-hmm.
And we all begin by leading ourselves. And so the question becomes is one of the questions I often ask of people is how do you want to show up as a leader?
Mm.
And then we have a choice around how do we get to show up, and we get to show up in every interaction as a leader.
Mm-hmm.
And we cannot, I think when we think about, and one of the things we've talked about is, as well as energy. And there's an energy that we have as we vibrate as human beings, right? We're energetic beings, and so we get to influence other people with our energy, and so we cannot not affect other people, right? In every interaction that we have. So from a leadership perspective, I think first and foremost is always being conscious and aware of how do I want to show up in any given situation in any given moment, which then means I need to be present in the moment in every interaction. And the more that I'm present in every interaction, the more conscious aware I am, and the more that I'm able to connect with whoever I'm speaking with and I'm interacting with, whether it's an employee, whether it's a vendor, investors, members, clients, however we want to categorize it. It's just being present in the moment as a leader and showing up. I always like to say, this idea of it's always about becoming the best version of yourself. That's the way I see leadership. I certainly, I've gotten to this point because I've made a lot of mistakes. I didn't always show up as the best version of myself. Clearly, I know that to be true. And so I've done my work, and I continue to do my work to really get to a better place. And I think from an industry perspective, I think from a leadership perspective, at a very high level, it's just, why are we doing this? All right, we're here, and I think about the fitness industry, and I'm so happy that we're now broadening the conversation into understanding that mental health is a part of what we can help people with, right? In that everyone is suffering today. Everyone has been traumatized in one way, shape, or form over the last few years. Forget about childhood trauma, right? That's a whole other kind of thing. Right. But if you think about just what's happened with COVID and all the social unrest and the political unrest and everything that's going, wars, and it's not normal to see images of somebody holding onto an airplane and falling off an airplane as it's taking off from your country. So it's like this constant little drip of trauma, and then the conversation around mental health is one that we have to get beyond the stigma of of people living in the shadows of depression and addiction. I think the fitness industry, in a lot of ways, what we are able to do in connecting people with community and bringing them together, right? Social isolation is a huge issue for us. So I think that from a leadership perspective, I think elevating the conversation, and really understanding what the impact is that the fitness industry can have on the world. Interesting. We just heard Raj Sisodia speak in October. Raj Sisodia is one of the co-founders of Conscious Capitalism, and he spoke at the CEO Summit where you and I facilitated that event. You attended, and the topic of his conversation was essentially, how the fitness industry can heal the world. And we are healing organizations, and people need healing.
That's definitely a conversation to go down. That's
a whole other thing, right?
That's a whole other podcast. You said a couple things that I want to unpack because I think they're so valuable. And the first place I want to start is people think leadership is a title that is conferred upon you, like you've been promoted to a leadership position. You said at the beginning of your statement on leadership that all of us show up as leaders. Talk a little bit more about that, because we have a lot of young listeners to our podcast that think, man, I'm just a trainer at a big box gym. How can I be a leader?
Well, let's start with the young, your comment. You just said, hey, we have a lot of young trainers. Right. So people aren't going to see us, right? They're going to hear my voice. Right. So I'm a 60-year-old white man. Right. So what I say to my peers is that we need to see things differently. We need to see the world differently, right? There's this multi-generational workforce that we have, And I'm going to speak from from the senior leadership perspective. There's certainly data out there that would support that. Most CEOs in larger company and organizations are going to look a lot more like me.
Mm-hmm.
And then there's this disconnect, there's this gap, there's this leadership gap that exists from how I might be seeing the world,
Mm-hmm.
right? How I was saw the world, and the way that the world is today, and the workforce looks very different. And so I believe that the job of leaders today is to lean into today's workforce and today's population, or work, and unlock the potential that exists within that young trainer, that young fitness professional. Like, they have wisdom and knowledge and expertise that I don't have. And so we have to take this approach that we're all students, we're all teachers.
Mm-hmm.
And I truly believe that. And so for for those that are I'm going to say up and coming,
Mm-hmm.
right? I think that my advice maybe is to seek an organization that is truly values driven, and is going to be in a place where you're going to be heard, and you're because you have something to offer. You have whatever your unique experience and the reason why you're getting into this industry and why you want to do what it is that you're doing and why you're going to school for whatever it might be,
Mm-hmm.
right? Certifications that you're looking to pursue, and how is it that you want to impact people's lives. I think it's just recognizing that you have a voice,
Mm-hmm.
and stand by your convictions, and follow your passion and your why. And you can make a difference in the world. Everybody can make a difference in the world.
Yeah, it is that realization that I think it's a leader is not a title that's conferred upon you. It's a role that you can choose to step into or not.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I mean, you're the CEO. You are the CEO of your life.
Yeah.
And it's really comes down to then the question of how is it that you want to conduct yourself. And I think of leaders today that one of the things that I'll say to people is that, well, people are trying to get back to the way it was in 2019.
Mm-hmm.
Right. And we've had this conversation, Mike, about how do I get back to, if I'm a business owner, a CEO, whatever it might be, how do I get back to those pre-COVID numbers, right?
Yep.
And what got you there isn't going to get you to where you want to be, where you need to be in the future, if that makes sense, right? Like, you got to start thinking differently, and you're going to need to do things differently because the world has changed and we ain't going back. We ain't going back to what it was like pre-COVID. The world has changed, and the workforce has changed, and the hybrid work is something that's very real, and people aren't necessarily going back to offices and so forth. So we need to see the world of work very differently.
Yeah, you said what got you here won't get you there. I believe that's a Marshall Goldsmith.
Right. I don't know if I watched that. Right.
Yeah, and it's so true. Now, so kind of in keeping with this theme of how to identify the leader that you want to show up as, like, that's a statement that I've made before, and I've heard you make it, I've heard others make it, and I can think back to early points in my career, if I really reflect, when somebody asked me how I want to show up, or what kind of leader do I want to be. Like, the first time I heard that question, I was just like, what do you mean? Like, I didn't even know what that means. So for somebody who's listening to this, that's maybe hearing that question for the first time, what kind of leader do you want to show up as? How do you suggest they approach a question like that if they've never thought of it before?
Yeah, here's a different way to look at it, right? Is think of it as like, who don't you want to be?
Mm.
Right. And what do I mean by that? Right. So first of all, what do we know about, and I'll talk about leadership, and I'm going to speak about management. Right. So our most important relationship, this is, Gallup and research suggests, McKinsey research suggests that our most important relationship that we have in our work life is our relationship with our manager.
Mm-hmm.
Right. And the reality is I'm going to say there's a, I don't know, I maybe overstate it, but there's a crisis of, of really that lack of management, great management and leadership in the world,
Yeah.
right? So worldview, if you will, right? So oftentimes, what happens is we see examples of the way that maybe we're being managed, or we see people being managed a certain way and led, and we say, well, I don't want to be that.
Mm.
Right. And so then it's a matter of, okay, so based on what I see that I don't want to be, what do I want to be? And sometimes that's, we see those examples, and they're kind of easier to identify, quite frankly, because it can be so egregious.
Yeah.
And there's plenty of examples of egregious behavior by leaders, right? So when you think about, like, why do leaders, when we see these public changes in organizations, right? And what, oftentimes it's about behavior.
Yeah.
So it's really about, like, how do I want to behave? And it's really, it is pretty, I think it's pretty simple in terms of, people want to feel valued,
Mm-hmm.
right? And that, there I was just at Case Western University with Ron Fry, who's one of the founders of Appreciative Inquiry, and he shared some interesting data around, and his observations around, people could maybe go through their entire life and have never been told that they are valued.
Mm.
And so what do we know is that people want to feel valued.
Mm-hmm.
They want to be seen, they want to be heard. And then from a human perspective, then it's about, this compassionate leadership that I also talk about, is that, that we're able to actually have this, there's a lot of talk about empathy,
Mm-hmm.
and that we want to have empathetic leaders. And, well, that's great. So empathy, I can kind of feel what that other person, I could put myself in their shoes. Well, compassion is actually then I'm taking action based on it, right? Which is, it's actually doing something as a leader to help to make, the workplace or that person's life just a little bit better. And I think that, from a leadership perspective, when I think about what the world, could use more of today, it is more compassionate leadership.
I'd like to take a quick break from today's episode to tell you more about one of our sponsors. As all of you are well aware, the COVID-19 pandemic has been absolutely devastating for the fitness industry, with upwards of 1/3 of our clubs closing nationally on a permanent basis. One of the few stabilizing forces during this very tumultuous period of time has been IHRSA, the Global Trade Association for the health and fitness industry. On my crusade to make fitness professionals part of our healthcare continuum, the work that IHRSA is doing is absolutely vital. They provide advocacy and lobbying support at both the federal and the state level. They support state alliances in many ways, and they also provide resources and best practices to club owners, operators, and individual fitness professionals. Indeed, if we are truly going to become part of the healthcare continuum, we must speak with one unified voice. We must have best practices that we implement, and we must come together as an industry to ensure the public, the medical community, and lawmakers hear our message loud and clear, that movement is medicine and it is essential. That is the work that IHRSA is doing. They've recently revamped their membership structure, allowing large clubs, small clubs, boutiques, and individual professionals to join the organization for an appropriate price that allows them to have access to all of these many great resources and allows us to unify and amplify our voice as an industry. For more information on the amazing work that IHRSA is doing, go to their website, IHRSA.org. That's IHRSA.org, IHRSA.org, to look in a little bit further into the work IHRSA is doing to unify our industry, to move us closer to being a part of that healthcare continuum. Now back to today's episode. Yeah, I'm so glad you went there with compassionate leadership, because this is something that I always viewed a critical component of leadership being empathy, but you and by way of the book that you introduced me to about compassionate leadership kind of really got me to shift my paradigm around the difference between empathy and compassion. And so I think that that's such an interesting and important distinction. I think a lot of people hear the word compassionate leadership and they almost scoff at it to a certain extent, because that's not the leadership that they're kind of used to seeing, where companies are trying to maximize profits or shareholder value. How prevalent do you think compassionate leadership is it just an ideal we're striving towards, or do you feel it's really out there?
Well, first of all, let me give credit where credit is due. So the book that you're referring to and the work is around a book called The Double Bottom Line, which is How Compassionate Leaders Captivate Hearts and Deliver Results by Donato Tramuto. So that's, I believe, the book that you're referencing.
Yes.
And then it's the work. I think that there's a thread line here through the work around conscious capitalism, which is the work of Raj Sisodia, who we also had the opportunity to hear at that CEO summit. Yep. So how prevalent is it? Let's just maybe the easier way to answer that is that we need more of it. How's that?
Yeah, right? you kind of where I was going.
It's like
how prevalent should it be?
Yeah, well, it's desperately needed.
Yeah,
it's desperately needed in the world, and the idea of conscious capitalism, just in its whole, right? So there's a great book called Firms of Endearment that was written by Raj Sisodia, where he researches the firms that have, that exhibited these qualities of a conscious organization, and compared them to the S&P, and they outperformed the S&P. I believe it was like 14-1 over time. They outperformed Jim Collins's good to great companies that he identified in good to great, I think by 6-1. And so, conscious capitalism is good for business. And really what it is with this mindset that, businesses, exist to elevate humanity. And when we think about that, that doesn't mean that you're not profitable.
Yeah.
Right. It's just how you go about gaining profit. And the reality is these companies are actually more profitable.
Yeah.
and are sustainable, and are the kind of companies that people want to work for, and we want their friends to work for us, and that the brands that we all have as consumers, we have a great affinity to these brands and a loyalty to these brands. So I think that it's waking up to realize, again, the waking up is the awakening leadership. It's that there's a different way to lead, and it does mean that you need to maybe think differently, and you also need to operate differently. And I'm gonna just give you an example, because there's I always find that organizations sometimes will say, oh, you're part of the XYZ family. Right? You're part of the XYZ family. And then you go, okay, well, if I look at the Glassdoor ratings for XYZ firm, and what is it that people are saying? Well, they're not speaking like they feel like they're part of a family. And one of the comments that I make, and look, I've run a lot of businesses, and I know how difficult this is, but when we think about health insurance as a way of example, and the cost of health insurance, and whether or not an employee is actually able to be covered by health insurance, I think of from a leadership perspective, well, if they were part of your family, wouldn't you want them to have health insurance?
Yeah.
And I realize that, that's a bold statement for me to make. And I recognize that, yeah, it's expensive.
Yeah.
But at the end of the day, what is the long-term impact that might have if I'm able to offer health insurance to my employees, and, they can actually take their children to the doctor and not be completely stressed about it, if you will, right? Financially. The other thing I'd say is, this is a way of also running a business that understands that, it's about purpose. It's about purpose, people, and profit.
Yeah.
And so why does this business exist, and what is the impact that we want to have on, on our the people we serve, which includes our employees? What's the impact that we want to have on our stakeholders? And then what's the impact that we ultimately want to have on, on the environment? What's the impact that we want to have on our community? What's the impact that we want to have on the world? And again, I truly, it's again, the data is telling us that today's workforce and population want to actually be a part of an organization that is here to do, is for a greater good
Yeah.
in the world. And I think there's a reset in terms of understanding, like, why does this business exist? And the last comment I'm going to make about, when we think about compassionate leadership, it's not without accountability.
Mm-hmm.
Like, sometimes people are like, oh, conscious compassion, like, I want to make, I need to make money.
Yeah.
And I'm like, well, those two things are not, mutually exclusive. Actually, being compassionate is actually to hold someone accountable for their actions. It's just, how do you go about doing that? And it's being able to have those, having those open and heartfelt conversations with people. When we think about somebody that's maybe, their performance is slipping, right? One of the questions oftentimes is like, what's going on?
Yeah.
How are you doing? Going back to my comment earlier about, mental health and crisis and so on and so forth, you were in a room when I gave a talk, and I asked the question around, everybody in the room, kind of, hey, raise your hand if you know somebody that's been affected by the opioid epidemic,
Mm-hmm.
right? Addiction, and pretty much everybody in the room knew somebody. They were able to raise their hand and said, yeah, they had either directly been impacted in their family, or they knew somebody. And I don't think there's anybody that, very few people that are going to say that they don't know of someone that, has suffered. Why am I saying that? Because, again, like, we don't know what may be going on in someone's life, why they're maybe not doing great in the job. And then there's also just the aspect of the work that I do with my work with predictive indexes to help people assess, do I have the right person for the right role?
Yeah.
And that's, how I'm able to help organizations with behavioral science and technology to identify the right person for the right role. And taking the guesswork out of, am I hiring the right person? And also, as an individual, am I in the right job? Am I wired to do this work?
Yeah. And predictive index is a whole nother conversation. I mean, there a lot of wisdom in what you said, and I am the idea of the principles that are talked about in the double bottom line, and some of what you talked about. We're going to link up to these books on the show notes page, because I think they're great resources for those of you that want to embrace these concepts of leadership. I think in an effort to send our listeners away with something actionable, if you could give one challenge or one opportunity for our listeners to focus on in 2023 as a leader, what would that opportunity be?
I think first of all is find your why. Really get clear on your purpose, your what's, why are you doing the work that you're doing every day? And then really reflecting on it, is this truly making, is it bringing joy to my life?
Mm.
And if it's not, do something else. Really, and I think then it's like, well, I don't know what I want to do. Well, you know what? Start by, again, it's figuring out, what don't I want to do?
Yeah.
Right. As well as lifting your head up and seeing where, where there may be other opportunities. And then once you get clear on your why, and then it's just, pursue that.
Mm.
And if you're clear on your why, then it's, understanding, kind of the Simon, it's the Simon Sinek, model, if you will, of, understanding the how, the how and the what.
Yeah.
But it's really, I think it's ultimately, and recognizing that your why is going to change.
Yeah.
My why has changed. I live in Denver, Colorado now. A few years ago, part of my why was really getting my figuring out how I was going to get to Colorado. And then I got here, and this why of around, as I shared earlier, around helping people do the work that they love to do every day, it became clearer to me within the last year and a half. And I'm pursuing that with, like, I wake up every day just excited to work. And how can I help, how can I help other people? And I think that's the other thing is, asking yourself, how can I be of service? It's understanding that how can I be of service and what value do I bring to the world? And we all bring a value. We all bring value. And so it's really just, I think, getting clear on your why.
And you're right. Oftentimes it is knowing your why without actually understanding the how and the what, realizing that if your why is your North Star, you'll figure out the how and the what.
Yeah. I mean, I'm smiling, Mike, because I have so much admiration and respect for what you're doing. And having now worked with you and your team and fairly recently had the good fortune to be in your presence for, with the team for a couple of days on a strategic planning sessions. It's very, your why. And I'd say that, the passion that you bring, like there's nothing that's going to stop you, Mike. You're driven. You've got an amazing vision that I feel blessed that I've now, I know you, and I'm working with you and your team, and I feel blessed to have this opportunity to somehow, be a part of what you're doing in a very, very, very small way, because what you're doing in the world it's pretty amazing. Radically transforming healthcare.
Thank you. Thank you. It's rare that the spotlight gets put back on me when I'm hosting a podcast. So I graciously will accept that. Thank you.
Yeah.
So tell us where people can go to find out about you and the great work that you're doing. Where's the best place to go?
The best place to go is text me. 914-804-1645. How's that?
That's the best answer to that question I have ever gotten.
Yeah, just text me. No, I have, you can find me on LinkedIn. I think my LinkedIn is Thomas S. Johnston. My website is talentoptimizergroup.com. Or you can email me at tom@talentoptimizergroup.com, or you can text me 914-804-1645.
Yeah, I love it. Well, we will link
and I will respond.
He will respond. We will link up to all of that on the show notes page. Cell phone number in. So before we bring this to a close, I want to end this on the question I always end the podcast with, which is the premise behind the wellness paradox for me goes right to this idea of radically transforming healthcare, which is how do we bridge the trust, communication, and interaction gap between fitness professionals and the medical community? Given all your experience in a wide variety of businesses, just talking to the fitness professionals, what do you feel they can do to overcome that gap?
Well, I gotta just say, Mike, I mean, I can't necessarily speak to what the gap is, quite frankly. I haven't spent enough time to understand, what, and analyze the gap, right? I think when we're elevating ourselves as true fitness professionals, and it really is about education. Mm-hmm. Right, like to play at that next level, you need to have the education, the experience, the certifications, whatever it might be to baseline prove that, hey, I have the knowledge and I have and then the expertise, and then you have to be, then you have to work at your craft. Like really, really practice your craft and again, becoming the best version of yourself. And I think it's always about sharpening your saw and constantly being a learner. And then being able to speak the language of healthcare, of a healthcare professional, and then recognizing that they're just people. And so the reality is that, oftentimes, the fitness professional, right, is going to come to the table with way more knowledge about fitness, exercise, science, etc., than a physician will.
Mm-hmm.
Right. And so now you have this level of expertise. And so recognizing that I'm going to say that you're equals and you're partnered here. And the partnership is around, let's take care of the client, the patient.
Mm-hmm.
And that's the commonality. And how do we partner to take the best care of this person? And the reality is that you, as the fitness professional, are going to spend a hell of a lot more time with that individual than the physician is, and you're going to probably know their body in ways that physician is never going to know their bodies.
Mm-hmm.
And so being able to speak that language, is and educate the medical, the medical community on what it is that you do and the difference that you're making in those people's lives. And I think ultimately it comes down to, as you start to work and partner with a physician, and all of a sudden that physician, 6 months after they've seen the person, they come back into their office and they're like, holy cow, what have you done?
Yeah.
Like, you don't need the meds anymore, right? You're walking, whatever it might be. Like, you have the ability to really impact these people's lives in ways that a physician can't. Flat, straight up.
Well, for someone who's never really thought a lot about the gap, that was a very solid answer of how to address the wellness paradox. Tom Johnston, thank you so much for joining us.
Thanks.
Well, I hope you enjoyed that conversation with Tom as much as I did. If you found it insightful and informative, please share with your friends and colleagues. Those shares make a huge difference for us. Any information we'd like to share with you from today's episode can be found in the show notes page by going to wellnessparadoxpod.com/episode 87. Please be on the lookout for next week's episode when it drops on Wednesday. And don't forget to subscribe through your favorite podcast platform. Until we chat again next week, please be well.